Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the forum at the John F. Kennedy School of Government. My name is Ira Jackson, and I'm director of the Center for Business and Government here at the school, and your host for this evening's presentation by Ray Anderson. At the Center for Business and Government, we focus on what many of us consider to be among the most interesting, complex, and important challenges facing our nation and the world. Through teaching, applied research, and engagement, we try to improve knowledge and practice where business and government meet, which these days is almost everywhere. Our holy grail is to find ways to reconcile markets with morals through a process that engenders public trust. We seek an appropriate balance between the efficiencies of markets and the demands of society for equitable outcomes in a way that produces legitimacy, which is in pretty short supply these days. Perhaps no issue lends itself more urgently to this perspective than the environment. On the eve of the 31st anniversary of Earth Day, the Bush administration seems skeptical of the science and approach behind the Kyoto protocols on global warming and wants time to reassess environmental issues in the context of an energy crisis. Business wants less intrusive and costly regulations, and the public wants and demands a cleaner environment, from arsenic in our drinking water to fuel efficiencies in our SUVs. We won't solve all these dilemmas this evening, but we will hear from someone who approaches the issue from a different perspective. We'll learn the story of one business that believes that it's possible to do good for the environment and to do well for shareholders at the same time. We'll be told the inspirational tale of the journey of one business leader who acts upon his convictions and who has demonstrated that sustainable and environmentally responsible corporate stewardship is not only possible, but preferable, and ultimately more profitable than doing things the way they have always been done before. There are many voices on the environment, many pitted on opposite sides of a strident and polarized argument. Our speaker tonight has reconciled the power of the market with a passion for purpose through a process that instills confidence, achieving an example that might motivate others to find a new and better way to promote growth, to respect the environment, and to achieve trust on this contentious and complicated issue. To properly introduce him to you, let me call upon the chair of the Kennedy School's Energy and Environmental Policy Interest Council. Stu Rosenberg is a lawyer and an environmental activist, and in 2 months he'll graduate from our Master in Public Policy program. Stu Rosenberg.
Before I begin, I'd like to thank all the co-sponsors who helped make this event possible: the Center for Business and Government, the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, obviously the Kennedy School of Government, Ecology and Environment Professional Interest Council. I'd like to personally thank Jennifer Tice, who's been my co-chair this year, who, frankly, I'm not sure how she puts up with me, but because of her, we've been able to make such significant progress in this school and to have speakers like Ray Anderson here. So I'd like to personally thank Jennifer Tice, if she could stand up for a moment. I'd also like to thank the Harvard Business School Sustainable Development Society, Graduate School of Design, Ecology and Design, the Harvard Divinity School, Students for Environmental Justice, the Faculty for Arts and Science Environmental Action Committee, of which we have Kate Widlin here, who has put in a significant amount of time in the undergraduate university to make sure not only at the Kennedy School, but throughout Harvard, that an environmental ethic becomes commonplace and not irregular. So Kate, if you could please stand. The Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, Graduate Environment Ecology Network, the Environmental Network, the Harvard Students United for Action on Climate Change, the Harvard Green Campus Initiative, the Consortium on Global Leadership, and the Institute of Politics. I'd like to introduce Ray Anderson. It's great pride for me to be able to introduce him. I've seen him speak once before, and he has shown that the paradigm for environmentalism is certainly changing. I'd like to thank many of you here in this audience who in the 60s and 70s stood up, jumped up and down, and showed that the environment was an issue. But I'm afraid the 60s are over, and that despite what has happened in Washington, D.C. recently, and there's still the need for jumping up and down and showing the environment's an issue, we also need to show that we need to embrace our similarities, not just identify our differences. That, in fact, in the 60s and 70s, we needed to show the economy versus environment. and have the us versus them to make it an issue. But now, as Ray Anderson has shown, it's a new paradigm where at times we can work and show that it is not just us versus them, it's not just finger pointing, that the environment is necessary to help the economy. And frankly, without a good economy, there's not a good environment. The two are not necessarily us versus them anymore. They're actually intertwined. Without one, we do not have the other. And Ray Anderson is the epitome of that new paradigm of showing that the environment and the economy together is the way of the future, that in fact you can make more money by doing the right thing. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Ray Anderson, the Chairman and CEO of Interface, Co-Chair, President's Council on Sustainable Development, 1997 to 1999, named to the top 15 American innovators by U.S. News & World Report, dubbed the greenest CEO of America, and frankly one who has shown that you can in fact do well by doing good. Ladies and gentlemen, Ray Anderson.
Thank you. Thank you all very much, and thank you, Stu, for that introduction. I bring greetings from Atlanta. I guess you picked up already this funny accent. It's probably a good idea that I talk some nonsense for a while you tune your ears to my accent. So let me just tell you a story to warm us up. It seems that, and you've probably heard it because it has been going around, but I like to tell it, so I'm going to do it. It seems that Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson went on a camping trip, and night came and they settled in, they went to bed. Middle of the night, Sherlock Holmes woke up, he punched Watson. Watson, wake up. Watson, what do you see? Watson roused himself and he looked up and he said, well, meteorologically speaking, I see we're in a high pressure zone. The sky is perfectly clear. Cosmologically speaking, I see an expanding universe and billions of galaxies, each containing billions and billions of stars. Astronomically speaking, I see our own galaxy, the Milky Way, and there are 5 first magnitude stars, Altair, Arcturus, Dana, Vega, Regulus. Astrologically speaking, I see that Mars is in Capricorn and Saturn is in Sagittarius. Chronologically speaking, I deduce from the position of the stars it's 3:15 a.m. What do you see, Holmes? After a moment's hesitation, Holmes replies, you can almost see his mouth dropping open, Watson, you idiot, someone has stolen our tent. Well, have you picked up my accent yet? Okay. Hang on to that punchline, because we will come back to it. Folks, I'm speaking to you today as an industrialist first. I think probably in the audience there are some customers, so I'm speaking also as a grateful supplier, thanking you for the business. And thirdly, I speak to you tonight as a fellow astronaut on Spaceship Earth. Very concerned for the health and the well-being of our spacecraft and for all its crew and passengers. And my self-appointed task tonight, my assignment, is not to amuse, but it is to disturb, to share my concern, perhaps to inform, rather than to entertain, and to sensitize, or most likely further sensitize you to what I believe is the crisis of our times. And if what I say seems radical and provocative, that's okay. I hope you will be provoked to radical new thinking. All of us need to do a whole lot more of that. What is the condition of Spaceship Earth, fellow astronauts? Business people love to get to the bottom line. Here's the bottom line, and it's not pleasant. There is red ink everywhere you look. And what I'm about to say could be shocking, maybe surprising to you, but it is factual, My researchers tell me that there's not been one peer-reviewed scientific paper published in the last 20 years that would refute, even contradict, anything I'm about to say. Just what kind of damage have we inflicted on Spaceship Earth? Every life support system and every living system that together comprise the biosphere where we and all the other creatures live, that spherical shell that's 8,000 miles in diameter, only about 10 miles thick, extending from sea level about 5 miles into the depths of the ocean, about 5 miles into the troposphere, on a basketball-sized Earth, tissue paper thin. Every living system, every life support system that make up that biosphere is stressed and in decline, long-term systemic decline, and the rate of decline is accelerating. Where's the red ink coming from? It's coming from polluted rivers and streams. It's coming from polluted and overfished oceans. Fish stocks collapsing, coral reefs dying. If you're a scuba diver, you know it's true. It's coming from lakes polluted, many dead from acid rain, from industrial pollution. It's coming from agricultural runoff, from forests too, dead and dying from acid rain, from atmospheric ozone. It originates in our cities. It drifts into the countryside. It not only attacks the forest, it affects crop yields adversely. We don't think a whole lot about that in this land of abundance, but in China, it is of paramount importance. The pollution that accompanies advancing industrialization in China will determine the balance, whether China can feed itself. I spoke this morning at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to the Army. The Army is getting concerned about sustainability. I mentioned that China that cannot feed itself is everybody's problem, and the Army's eyes open up to that possibility. A China that cannot feed itself is a problem for the world. Disappearing wetlands, the beginning of the food chain that leads to us at the other end, devastated rainforest, a critical lobe of Earth's own lungs, old-growth forest, a haven for biodiversity, almost gone, mostly clear-cut, destroying habitat for countless species. Aquifers depleted, polluted. In parts of India and China, the water tables in the ground falling 5 feet a year. Deserts spreading, farmlands denuded of topsoil, increasing in salinity from irrigation, toxified by pesticides, rangelands pushed to the limit of their carrying capacity. Of course, they're feeding the livestock that feed us. Our atmosphere, polluted by countless toxins, carbon dioxide, other greenhouse gases building up inexorably to create climate aberrations, global warming. Even our stratosphere, beyond the troposphere, where ozone shields us from deadly ultraviolet radiation, all severely stressed by man-made degradation, human intervention. And there are exceptions to celebrate, too, and we should not forget that we can now see across the street in Pittsburgh. We couldn't 40 years ago. In Cleveland, the Cuyahoga River no longer catches fire as it did some 30 years ago. The eagles are back again on the upper reaches of the Mississippi. The Great Lakes are becoming stabilized. In London, there are fish in the Thames at Tower Bridge. In British Columbia, the old-growth forest is being protected finally. The fragility of the deserts is being recognized at last. Beach closings are down in New Jersey. Clams are back in Puget Sound. But the salmon are disappearing from the rivers that feed Puget Sound, and for sure we need many more victories to celebrate because the general pattern worldwide is frightening. And it's getting worse. And for every positive exception, there are huge deficits on the other side of the ledger by the name of Beijing, Shanghai, Bangkok, Sao Paulo, Mexico City, Cairo, Delhi, the Amazon, the spreading Sahara, and on, and eventually Atlanta and Boston. Most of these places seem far away until we remember that there is only one global biosphere. And one result of the stress from human intervention is that species are disappearing at a rate unknown in 65 million years. Of course, this is not good for our species either, because we are, of course, fouling our own nest too, and we can't live without those life support systems any more than the other creatures can, though in our denial and our arrogance we may think we can. And as if that were not enough, you can add to the list this growing nuclear cleanup that nobody really knows how to deal with. Now, what language shall we use to tell people 20,000 years from now how to deal with this legacy of nuclear poison that we have left them? No language on earth is that old. None is 20,000 years old, and I'm told plutonium is a 500,000 year problem. And then you can add to that 1 billion people, that's with a B, looking for work and cannot find it. Another 1 billion living in starvation conditions, another 1 billion hanging on by their fingernails, half of Earth's people in trouble, subsisting on $2 a day or less. 2/3 of humanity basically left out by the modern industrial and economic system. Social equity, that's attention to human capital, just as the environment is attention to natural capital, both in serious trouble as we focus myopically, in my opinion, on financial capital. And I don't believe we can escape the consequences of that misplaced focus. We witness the ravages of AIDS, and we wonder, my God, what's next? Furthermore, for companies like mine, finite, exhaustible, non-renewable resources, natural gas, coal, oil, earth-stored natural capital, mind you, being gobbled up at an obscene rate. Most of it burned for energy, in the process converted into carbon dioxide to exacerbate the greenhouse effect, and the beat goes on. It is a crisis. It is the crisis of our times, and perhaps of all time to come, because it's a funeral march to the grave. If we don't figure out what to do and do what's necessary to reverse that trend, that deadly trend, we have done so much damage so quickly. Now let me try to put that in perspective. If we take the entire history of Earth, 4.5 billion years, and represent it by a timeline a mile long, everybody knows what a mile is, from the formation of the Earth out of the solar nebula 4.5 billion years ago right up to today, a timeline a mile long. What's going on along that timeline? Well, for the first 240 yards of the mile, there was no life. The place was getting geologically organized. And then life. Life began with that first microscopic, single-cell, anaerobic, prokaryote bacterium somewhere in the primordial oceans, and life survived. And then life lifted itself by its very bootstraps and proliferated into the mind-bending diversity we see today, as each species, through its metabolic process, aided by sedimentation and sequestration, prepared the way for the next species, and the next, and the next, gradually sweetening the earth, removing the toxic hostility of that early world's atmosphere and sending it down there into the Earth's crust to allow for a biosphere to evolve up here. Increasing diversity of life, decreasing toxicity, a sweeter and sweeter Earth, an evolving biosphere, a mutually reinforcing process, producing a biosphere finally sweet enough that we could evolve into it and survive. Do you know when in the mile-long timeline we appear, we Homo sapien, emerged to rule the earth? The last 7/10 of an inch in the mile-long timeline. And we rule the earth, and we eventually create the industrial age. Do you know how much of the mile-long timeline is occupied by the industrial age? the last 3/1000th of 1 inch, the thickness of a human hair in a mile-long timeline. At least 6 times in the history of Earth, that mutually reinforcing cycle process was reversed. Toxicity increased. Biodiversity plummeted. We don't know too much about the earliest of those events, but when we examine just the last 100 yards of our timeline, we can see 3 of those reversals. 260 million years ago, something cataclysmic happened. Toxicity spiked. 96% of all life on Earth vanished. The greatest mass extinction in history. But life picked itself up, and the process resumed, and in time the giant reptiles came to rule the Earth until 65 million years ago, when that comet or possibly asteroid struck the Earth in the region of present-day Yucatan, and that toxic hostility, put away by nature, so painstakingly exploded again to encircle the planet, and 75% of life on Earth disappeared, vanquished into extinction, including the mighty dinosaurs. If it can happen to them, it can happen to any creature that walks the face of the earth. But life picked itself up again, and the process resumed, and this time mammals got a chance. Hallelujah. And eventually, we, self-named wise man, emerged to occupy our tiny sliver of time, 7/10 of an inch so far, and to create our industrial age, 3,000th of an inch so far, to bring forth into the biosphere once more the toxic hostility nature had so painstakingly put away down there. And the result, 7 out of 10 biologists of the American Biological Association, polled about 4 years ago now, agreed the 3rd mass extinction in Earth's recent history is underway now, as species are disappearing at a rate unknown on Earth since the mass extinction of the dinosaurs. Biologists tell us 1,000 to 10,000 times the normal rate over that span of time. Does anyone think that this is okay, and that this is not a problem for you and me, for us? All the others, unavoidable results of natural disasters, but this one's different. The largely unconscious act of the highest form of intelligence yet to evolve, and the fruit of that intelligence, the industrial age. And once one understands the crisis, deeply understands it, no thinking person can stand idly by and do nothing. Denial is alluring and seductive, and it's even natural. But when you get past denial, you know you must do whatever you can. I put the story of my awakening in this book entitled Mid-Course Correction. It's my story, it's my company's story. The title is intended to suggest that humankind, our spacecraft, needs a mid-course correction. But what must be done? Who can lead? Who will lead in such a crisis? Would you not look to your strongest institution on earth to step up to take the lead? But who would that be? Government? I don't think so. Not the government I know. Well, then maybe the church. I don't think so. I think the church is part of the problem. Education. Education is too slow, too ponderous. Perhaps you can prove me wrong, Ira. All of these, no doubt, have roles, but can they lead? That's the question. I got my wake-up call. I found the disturbing answer to this question in August of 1994. My personal mid-course correction came while reading Paul Hawkins' book, The Ecology of Commerce. It was a spear in the chest for me, an epiphanal experience, and I completely agreed with Hawkins' central thesis that business and industry, the largest, the wealthiest, the most powerful, the most pervasive institution on earth, and the one doing the most damage, my institution, must take the lead in directing Earth away from this man-made collapse towards which we are hurtling, to turn us away from the abyss, to stop the mass extinction that unchecked will surely in time claim our species too. Government, church, education, all have roles, but if business and industry don't step up and lead, it is over. You can forget it. When all of this became clear to me, some nearly 7 years ago, I, a confessed plunderer of the earth, felt I had no alternative looking for leadership but to look in the mirror. And then I asked my people to join, to lead. To lead what? They said. I answered, let's lead in pioneering the next industrial revolution. The next industrial revolution, but why? Well, my central message to you tonight would be that the first industrial revolution, of which we are all a part, and all beneficiaries, I as much as most anyone, is not working. It is unsustainable. It is a mistake. It began 289 years ago in England when Mr. Newcomen invented the steam-driven pump to pump water out of the English coal mines so the coal miners could get it more coal to mine instead of hauling buckets of water out of the mine shaft. And for the first time ever, nature was harnessed and turned on nature to exploit nature through the power of a machine. And it just grew from there with only the invisible hand of the market giving any direction. And it turns out that the invisible hand was also blind. And it all came out wrong. The damage to benefit ratio is completely out of whack when every life support system on Earth is in decline. What could be more obvious? So I believe we need another and a better industrial revolution. And this time we must get it right. Time is running out on industrialism as we have known it. Now that could maybe just sound too radical to you or too outrageous. Perhaps you'd rather not listen to this stuff. Well, it will take an awful lot to change. Denial is a whole lot easier. Yet is it not something enough to devote a lifetime to? Some people think it is. But will we solve the problem from the same mindset that created the problem? Maybe we could talk about that for a little bit. Dana Meadows just died. How many people knew Dana Meadows? Dana Meadows was one of the smartest people I ever knew. She was a systems analyst, an expert systems analyst, an author, syndicated columnist, a college professor at Dartmouth, a farmer. Dana published this most elegant paper in 1997 entitled Places to Intervene in a System in Increasing Order of Effectiveness. And in sort of David Letterman fashion, she lists the places to intervene in a system, 9, 8, 7, and so forth. Number 9 on the list, the least effective place it even makes the list, is to adjust the resources, the numbers, the quantities going into the system, the people, the dollars, the standards, the taxes, the subsidies. A little further on down the list, well, regulate the negative feedback loops of the system. That's more effective. A little further on, drive the positive feedback loops of the system, even more effective. Further on down the list, change the goals of the system. But the most effective place to intervene in a system, according to this brilliant woman, is to challenge and change the mindset behind the system. The paradigm, the view of reality, how things are that underlie the system. This is the place, she says, that has the greatest effect, but she acknowledged it was also the most difficult place. Well, I was taken by that paper, perhaps you can tell, and I'll be thought about it, and I realized that obviously we've got systems all around us. We have transportation systems, computer systems, communication systems, regulatory systems, production planning systems, accounting systems, banking systems, systems for managing our households. We have our educational system, and we have the industrial system as it has arisen out of the Industrial Revolution. And I would ask you, as I ask myself, what is the mindset behind the modern industrial system? You might ask it about the educational system if you like, but look at the industrial system and see how it operates, and you know it originated in another day and age. And it still acts as if it views reality just as it did then 289 years ago. Here are a few examples of the mindset behind the system. The earth is so large, it's an inexhaustible source of materials, natural resources. We'll never run out. There'll always be substitutes available. The earth is so large, it's a limitless sink. It's able to assimilate our waste, no matter how much, no matter how poisonous. Relevant time frames. There's an interesting one. Why the maximum the life of a human being, more likely the working life of a human being. Sometimes we know in business just the next quarter, in government just the next election. Or this one, the church has a hand in this one. Earth was made for man, made by God for man to conquer and rule. And Homo sapiens sapien doesn't really need those other species except for food and fiber and fuel and maybe shade on a hot summer day. And this one, technology. Technology is omnipotent. It will solve our problems, especially when coupled with human intelligence. Well, what kind of intelligence is there? You know, left brain intelligence, practical, objective, realistic, pragmatic, numbers-driven, results-oriented, unemotional boardroom thinking. Thank you. These will suffice. Or this one, Adam Smith's invisible hand of the market as an honest broker. Or this one, labor productivity. Increasing labor productivity is the only route to abundance for all. Natural enough, at a time when people were scarce and natural resources were plentiful. Today it's the other way around. People are plentiful, natural resources are scarce and growing scarcer. Or this one, happiness is to be found in abundance. That is, affluence, material stuff, the trappings of affluence. And here's one for the real estate developers. Undeveloped land is empty land. Or one for the business people. Business exists to make a profit. Or for the economist. The environment is a subset of the economy. Paul Hawkins' book, and many others that I've read since then, in my own late blooming common sense, have convinced me that every element of that paradigm is dead wrong, and survival of our species, no less, depends on a new industrial system developing, and the sooner the better, based on a new and more accurate view of reality. One that would acknowledge, for example, juxtaposed against each of those wrong elements of reality, a different set of elements of reality, a different worldview, if you please, that acknowledges that the earth is finite, not infinite. You can see it from space, that's all there is to it. It's finite both as a source, what it can provide as a sink, what it can assimilate and endure. There will come an end to the substitutes that are possible. Some things are complementary. You cannot substitute water for food or air for water, or food for warmth, and so on. Relevant time frames are perhaps evolutionary in scale or even geologic. We must at least think beyond ourselves and our own brief, puny time on Earth, our 1/1000th of an inch in Earth's timeline. Think of our species across evolutionary time. Earth has another whole mile to go. Is, say, a whole inch too much to hope for our species? How much is that? Another 1,000 generations to go with the 2,500 generations past for just 1 inch in Earth's 2-mile long journey. Do you think we'll make it 1,000 generations practicing the ways of the last 10 generations? Not likely, in my mind. And this one, humankind was made for Earth, not the other way around, not Earth for man. The diversity of nature is crucially important, keeping the whole web of life, including us, going sustainably over geologic time. And technology must fundamentally change if it's to become part of the solution instead of continuing to be the major part of the problem. Technologies of the first industrial revolution share these characteristics. Check me out. They are extractive. They take. Economics 101, all wealth ultimately comes from the earth. They are extractive, linear, take, make, waste technologies, fossil fuel driven for energy, abusive, wasteful, and focused on labor productivity. The technologies of the new industrial revolution will share a whole different set of characteristics. In my view, they will be renewable, not extractive. They will be cyclical, not linear. They will be solar hydrogen driven, not fossil fuel driven, benign and waste-free as nature is waste-free, and focused on resource productivity, all resources, not just labor. And what about human intelligence? Well, how about the right side of the brain? You know, the caring, the nurturing, the artistic side, the subjective, sensitive, emotional side. In business, the soft side of business. Perhaps it's at least as important as the left side, maybe even more so since it represents the human spirit. If something doesn't feel right, chances are it's not right, no matter what the numbers say. And, of course, the market is not always an honest broker. The invisible hand is blind. It can be opportunistic. It can be outright dishonest in its willingness to externalize any cost that an unwary or uncaring public will allow it to externalize. It must constantly be redressed to keep it honest. And happiness, well, it surely lies somewhere other than in material things, the trappings of affluence. And by the way, undeveloped land is full. It's teeming with life. And life should be respected. And business makes a profit to exist. It exists for some higher purpose, surely. And here we have that contrast between the necessary and the noble, between success and significance. And number 12, I'll come back to that in a moment. There is this problem then, this immediate proximate problem. The life support systems of Earth are in decline. And there's a problem behind the problem, an industrial system based on a flawed view of reality, a discredited, disproven worldview. And the ultimate problem, therefore, is the mindset behind the system, that old flawed view of reality, and 6.1 billion minds must change, and it will happen, of course, one at a time. The real crisis of our times, therefore, is in our heads, the mindset behind the system. My friend David Crockett, the city councilman in Chattanooga, Tennessee, calls for global change. We must get our heads straight. An industrial system based on a flawed view of reality will crash, just given enough time. Watson, you idiot. Someone has stolen our tent. Watson overlooked the obvious and got lost in the details of the firmament. Tim Worth tells us, Tim Worth, former Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs, now works for Ted Turner, the United Nations Foundation. Tim says, don't overlook the obvious. And by the way, this is number 12. In this new world view, there's one great truth. The economy is the wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. It is not the other way around. The economy is the subset of the environment. And we cannot hope to have a prosperous child without a healthy parent. Or to put it another way, what CEO do you know, given a subsidiary that required a constant infusion of capital just to keep it going, would hold on to that subsidiary for very long? Not one I know of. It would be gone. And I do believe that nature's a better manager than any CEO I know, and capable of being far more ruthless if she needs to be. Well, you wouldn't know it from what I've said so far, but I'm actually in the solutions business, trying to figure a way out of this mess that we've made. Guided by a song we sang in Sunday school when I was a child. Brighten the corner where you are. Brighten the corner where you are. Someone far from harbor you may guide across the bar. Brighten the corner where you are. And I couple that with a reading 30 years later in my life when I read Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative, paraphrased, before you do something, consider the consequences. What if everybody did it? Brighten the corner where you are. What if everybody did it? That is the formula for a sustainable society. But first, you must understand the problem. The modern industrial system is destroying the biosphere. And then you realize that it's all a design problem, a challenge to our creativity. And I believe we must design and build a new system based on a new mindset that will conserve what is in diminishing supply, precious natural resources. This is so clear if we just apply the perspective of a species thinking in evolutionary time about how to live sustainably into the indefinite future on a finite earth. And I think we can do it profitably, harnessing the power of the market to do it, but it must be an honest market. I believe we can satisfy the imperatives of the environment, of social equity, and of economics. And I don't think it has to be done balancing the trade-offs. You sort of trade one here for the other one there and hope to meet somewhere in the middle with the best compromise you can devise. That's the old three-legged stool of sustainable development: economy, environment, equity. Trade-offs and compromise result in incrementalism. Incrementalism has brought us to where we are today, but the life support systems of Earth are still in decline, and half of Earth's people, human beings, are destitute and getting worse. More regulations? Absolutely not. More initiative, more innovation, more creativity. I think we can build a three-stage rocket. E times E times E equals true prosperity. Building capital in all three of its types in a virtuous, positive feedback loop. Doing well by doing good is a better way to make a bigger profit and move beyond success to significance. How to do it? That's, of course, the question. It's a mountain to climb. Mid-course correction gives our plan for climbing that mountain, the 7 faces of Mount Sustainability that we've identified so far. We're looking for the 8th. We know it's there. So far we've found the 7, and we climb on. I'm out of time. I'm supposed to leave time for questions, so I will just stop right there, having teased you, I hope, into buying my book. Thank you.
Time for a little more global change. The way it works here in the forum is if you have a question, you come up to one of these 2 mics on the floor. You please identify yourself and 1 question per customer, please, and no long speeches. Questions?
Hi, my name is Barbara Bachelot. You mentioned before that education is a slower road to transformation from business, and I certainly understand that. But I'd like to hear some thoughts of yours in terms of graduates from higher education. There are 40 million a year that go into industry, policy, every field. So there's a huge potential there to integrate sustainability into education. And I'd like to hear what your thoughts on that.
I absolutely agree. And the one institution where I'm more intimately involved than any other is Georgia Tech, which is my school. And there they have had for years now the Center for Sustainable Technologies on campus, theoretically stirring up the campus on sustainability issues. And then a new president came into the university, and he shuffled the whole deck again with vision, mission, strategy, and in a collegial fashion began to rewrite the whole mission of the university. And the first draft that came out had no mention of the environment in it, whatever. So I was in a position at the time as the chairman of the Georgia Tech Advisory Board, this advisory board to the president, to say something about that. Cut a long story short, in due course, the vision came out and sustainability was in the first paragraph. But the point of that is that once it was there in the vision statement of the university, they began to look around and say, what does this mean? And they did a survey on campus, and they found 200 projects going on campus, research projects all over that campus pertaining in one way or another to sustainability. Nobody had any idea that much was going on. And now they're working to infuse sustainability into the curriculum, to first of all demonstrate it on the campus in the daily operations, and to be sure that the research effort is pursued. And today, sustainable technologies is one of the three primary strategic initiatives of the university, along with biotechnology and telecommunications technology. So it can be done. And of course, the students coming out of Georgia Tech, part of the 40 million you're talking about, will be prepared as they never would have been for leadership roles. And it's urgently necessary that other institutions do the same thing. I agree completely.
Hi, my name is Mike Weissman. I work here at the Kennedy School. Another system, in addition to the industrial system, which has a profound impact on our spaceship Earth, is the system by which the human species feeds itself, i.e. the choice to consume a meat-based or a plant-based diet. And ironically, in fact, that system is increasingly an industrial system in its own right, at least in the more developed nations of the world. And as you mentioned with China, as China industrializes, its problems with that system increase. And we've also seen that as nations develop, so to speak, they move usually from a more plant-based diet to a more meat-based and resource-intensive diet. Yeah. And I wonder if you can comment on how much you've looked at this in your own study and what role you think that might have in changing the course.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in the field on food production. I totally sympathize with the organic farmers and the people who are taking up the view opposed to the gigantic industrial farming. I totally sympathize with it, but I don't know enough, honestly, to comment on the pros and cons in the long-range future of that. Of course, genetically modified organisms scare us all to death. We don't know where that's going or what it means, and nobody does. In fact, the scientists working with it probably don't either. So the whole field of food production is frightening. I'm told that there's plenty of food in the world. The problem is distribution, but I don't know that that's true. Getting it where it's needed is the hard problem. Yeah.
Hi. I work for Friends of the Earth in London as a waste campaigner, and a lot of my job is about trying to convince industry that they can profit from the virtuous circle that you described, from zero waste and moving to the new paradigm. And I'm always trying to sell that message to them. But a lot of people, and you mentioned yourself that we need more innovation, more creativity, but less regulation. A lot of people actually say to me, well, we're all kind of preparing ourselves to jump, but it won't happen until we get the legislation, and we need that regulation. It needs to come from government. Once it costs more to pollute, to waste, then people will stop doing it. And I very much see it as a kind of joint process, encouraging the regulation, the right regulation, making the economic framework right, as well as encouraging the innovation and the creativity. So what are your views on the right sort of legislation and regulation?
Right. I think the regulatory process has served us well. I really do. The stick has worked to prod us to where we are today. I do believe that even the EPA acknowledges that it's somehow got to get on the other side and create the carrot, the pull, and the incentives, the positive incentives as opposed to negative. They don't know how to do it yet. They're really struggling. On my way to Fort Bragg yesterday, I was visiting with the EPA in North Carolina, and they don't know how to do it. They're asking questions. And frankly, I don't know how to tell them to do it either. The regulatory process, though, has served us well, and I didn't say less regulation. I just said I'm not calling for more. What I am calling for is innovation. We're operating our little company in a microcosm where the fact that it's heavily influenced by interior designers and architects who want to do the right thing creates a marketplace for us that perhaps doesn't yet exist on a larger scale. And so we have this sort of unique partnership with our marketplace. Now, the real issue is how to multiply the marketplace, not just for carpet products like we make, but for all products. Now, who is that? That's people. That is people voting with their pocketbooks and voting in the voting booth as well. It's the power of the marketplace. And the hardest-headed, meanest-minded business person you know, I can imagine, will respond to his customers. So the power of the market is where it's at.
Hi, I work for an affordable housing non-profit, and we'd love to be a customer of yours, but we're getting there. My question, it sounds like you're a believer in ecological economics as opposed to neoclassical economics. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on the most effective way to make that transition from the status quo where the environment's a subdivision of the economy to a more accurate view of the world.
I have one big idea. Get the price right on a barrel of oil.
Right.
If we could persuade our Congress to shift taxes from good things like your income and mine and your capital and mine, your property and mine, to bad things like waste and pollution and carbon dioxide production, shift the taxes from good things to bad things in a revenue-neutral way, it would change the world as we know it. It would create the incentives.
Okay. Thank
you. Concerning that statement of what if everybody did it, this is a good one. I reflect on it, and has value to me because some of the things that I do in pursuit of a purpose of inspiring others to do ecological ways, etc., would seem to justify that I own things that I wouldn't otherwise own, a vehicle to do business, etc., etc. Actually, I probably own a vehicle anyway. But the question is, and it has some ecological parallels to me, is that in ecologies there's niches of things that are more suited to do certain tasks, and to such entities, special resources and materials would be accorded so that they may do that task. So my first question would be sort of how you thought about that, what I'm saying, that there's almost two things in parallel. Is what if everyone did it, and then maybe there's another track of specifically everyone shouldn't do these things, and yet they are necessary or positive. And the second part of that question is, what? Only one part? Okay. This is one question. It really is one question. Following from that is, what selection process, or have you reflected on this at all? And the reason I ask is because competition by incompetent competitors leads to potentially a lot of problems. I mean, material and business-wise and waste. Yeah,
I'd like for the regulatory process to keep the playing field level. Okay, and that'll stop the cheaters. I don't know about your other question. It seems a little bit difficult. I drive a Prius. What do you drive?
Stephen Strong, Solar Design Associates. Ray, your presentation is compelling. You have defined the predicament. You've described how we've gotten here. You've even singled out industry as both the problem and the solution. My question is, how do we in fact harness industry to make this happen? What's your best thinking after all these 7 years?
Right.
Please share that with us.
Thanks. When I first challenged our people to lead our company towards sustainability, I actually challenged them to go beyond, to restorative. And they spent a couple of days, this little group of people where it all started, talking about that, and they came back and said, we sort of think we get sustainability, and we want to move that way. We got it. But we don't understand restorative. You know, that sounds like perpetual motion. How you do that? So we talked about it. And we decided that if we could actually begin to move in a credible way towards sustainability, that somewhere up that curve, something else would happen, that we would begin to influence other companies to move in that direction. And that's the way we could become restorative, through the power of influence. We can get to sustainability. It would be those others that we influence to move in that direction that takes us beyond sustainability, into restorative. So on the one hand is the power of influence. I personally think it's pretty important we succeed at this, because if we can set the example in the strictest business sense, that, you know, that this is good business, then others will follow. The other side of that is that we will never succeed at this without our customers' support. That's where it all started, as our customers were asking us 7 years ago, what's your company doing for the environment? That's where it all started with us. Today, if our customers don't embrace what we're doing, we will fail. The power is in the marketplace. It's the same answer that I gave to an earlier question. The power is in the marketplace. The marketplace is people. Marketplace is you making your decisions. I have read a book recently entitled Cultural Creatives. How many have seen the book, Cultural Creatives? The thesis of the book is that there is an emerging subculture in America. It's the convergence, the confluence of a lot of movements going back to the civil rights movement, the environmental movement, the labor movement, the women's rights movement, the spirituality movement, the alternative health movement, and so on and so forth. All of these converging into a new subculture. A subculture that holds a different worldview from the traditional worldview that, you know, thinks the world was created 5,000 years ago in 6 days, literally. Different from the modern point of view, the market-driven point of view. It's a new subculture, a forward-looking point of view. And the amazing thing is the researchers believe that there are 50 million Americans that would identify themselves with this subculture, but they have no idea how many of them there are, and they have no idea that they're not alone. They think they are alone, that there's 50 million of them. Well, the work of a lifetime would be to coalesce 50 million Americans to speak with one voice, the voice of the marketplace, the voice of the electorate. Stephen, you got any ideas on how to coalesce 50 million Americans? That's where it's at today, and growing. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Talbot. I'm a fellow over at the design school. And my question was pretty much basically the question that the gentleman just asked. I'll just dovetail onto that with looking at leadership from above as well. It seems like there's several stories of corporate leaders who have personally embraced this vision and have been able to make really powerful change in that way. And I wondered what your thoughts are about how do you engage that more broadly? How do you see the effectiveness of the Businesses for Social Responsibility, BSR, organizations like the Heinz Foundation that are trying to build public-private partnerships and spreading
I think there's a lot of good things going on there. I think there today are literally hundreds of companies that are moving at different rates, but nevertheless moving toward this direction. It may be in the laboratory. They're totally out of sight, but they are moving. I think it's hundreds. And you can look at the membership of BSR. It's over 1,000 companies. You can you look at various series and the support it has from industry and Jimmy and various ones of these. And there's a lot going on. More than the general public realizes. Yeah.
Is it really
Did I
reaching?
get to your question?
Yeah. Is it really reaching the corporate culture? Do you see it kind of a transformation in a broader sense with CEOs?
Depends on the marketplace.
We've got two more questions, or maybe three. I was going to ask one. It's just informational. We cut you off for time, and we're going to have to cut the forum over when these three women finish their questions. But I think, Ray, you need to spend 3 to 5 minutes telling us what you've done in your company. I think it's lost in our needing to wrap things up that we encourage you to talk philosophically and theologically about the larger issues, but the credibility that you bring is not only your philosophy, but the fact that you're a CEO of one of the world's largest textile industrial carpet companies, and that you've done it, you've put it to work, you engage the energies of your own people, and you're making progress as well as profits.
Right.
So can you tell us that story?
Sure. I'll give it a try. We found 7 faces of Mount Sustainability. I think I said that earlier. I referred you to the book. They're there. Eliminating waste. In 6 years, we've saved $165 million. Real money, hard dollars. 27% of our profits have come from eliminating waste. Today, we're at a 51% reduction overall, and that's waste measured any way you can think of it. Anything we don't do right the first time is waste. That's paid for all the rest of this. The second face of the mountain is the emissions, to be sure that whatever we do emit is benign to the biosphere. We've counted every smokestack, every effluent pipe, what's going out, how much there is, and we're in the process of reducing that, and we have so far shut down 25% of those, closed them off, outlet pipes, because we don't need them anymore. That's one measure of progress. So the money on waste reduction is a measure of progress. The money on emissions, the measure of emissions reduction is eliminated smokestacks. The third face of the mountain is renewable energy. We have focused on efficiency to drive energy usage to that irreducible minimum. We're a long way from there, but we've begun already to deploy photovoltaics in a modest way. We've contracted for wind power in the United Kingdom and in Holland. So we're moving toward renewable sources of energy. Our CO2 emissions are on a per unit production basis are down, I believe the number is 25% in 6 years, somewhere in there. Kyoto's a piece of cake, yeah, if people really get at it. The fourth face of the mountain is closing the loop on material flows. We're a petrochemically intensive company. We take petrol materials from the earth, process it through our suppliers, through our factories to produce our products. We're learning to close the loop on the various components of that material flow. We're not all the way there yet by any means, but we're getting there on every one of those major components. The objective is to close the loop on material flows, drive the process with renewable energy so that we never have to take another drop of oil from the earth. That epitomizes the vision. A petro-intensive company taking no oil from the earth. That together with factories with no outlet pipes. The fifth face of the mountain is the transportation face, carbon neutral transportation. We're in the hands of the automotive industry basically. Today, there's a carbon gap, we plant trees, carbon offsets to close the gap on carbon. The sixth face of the mountain is sensitizing ourselves within our company, our people, our suppliers, our customers, the communities where we operate, to create, as it were, a ecosystem, an interface ecosystem where cooperation prevails as opposed to confrontation. And I can't say where we are on that one. It's a never-ending process of sensitization. But we're making progress without a doubt. The seventh face of the mountain is to reinvent commerce itself, to figure out, for example, how to provide the service that our product delivers without selling the product itself. Carpet exists to deliver color and texture and warmth and comfort underfoot and acoustical value, ambiance, functionality, design, all those services that the carpet supplies. We'd like to sell the service and retain ownership in the means of delivering the service, to make carpet a product of service. And when we own the carpet for its entire life cycle, cradle to cradle, you can bet we will make maximum utilization of those precious organic molecules, and we will figure out how to close the loop and do it over and over again. We've invested $200 million in the distribution system that in time will become the collection system that closes the loop. When the technologies are all there in place, we will have that closed loop. The macro measure that we use to track our progress is the amount of stuff, natural capital, extracted natural capital required to produce $1 of revenue for our company, taking the whole supply chain into account, including the energy that drives our processes and our suppliers' processes. And in 6 years, that is down about 24 or 25% pounds of stuff per dollar of revenue.
That wasn't a philosopher speaking, that was a CEO.
And I add one more thing. When our product design people got it, and they got it by going to the biomimicry, imitating nature, drawing inspiration from nature, when they really got it focused on designing sustainable products, we are now getting products we never, ever would have got out of our design process, moving us to another whole level in the marketplace. That is perhaps the single most important thing that has happened.
3 questions.
Hi, my name is Markley Baventure, and I'm at the design school, where I started with a friend of mine in ecology and design, which has faced numerous barriers, the largest of which is that there are very few precedents of successful ecological design. And I'm wondering, especially in a company like yours that deals with all of these technologies that have maybe not yet been proven, how you manage your risks and uncertainty involved with those technologies.
Well, we're investing in them when they make sense. And we're spending what's necessary to get us to the point of being able to make that decision. Does this make sense for the long term? And believe me, we've had a lot of stuff come out of the woodwork, that people bring us crazy ideas, and we spend the time to evaluate them. And we spend too much time almost evaluating harebrained schemes because we don't want to miss anything. But the rule of common sense ultimately is what's guiding us on our investments. The same investment hurdles that any other investment has to make.
Ray, Leith Sharp from the Harvard Green Campus Initiative. The more I look into this whole situation that we're in, it becomes obvious that there's not only a fragile global ecology, but there's a fragile mental ecology that we have to deal with. One of the greatest challenges that I see confronting us is the challenge of sustaining a vision in the face of so many barriers. And I think that everyone here today would have direct experience of that, perhaps almost every day of their lives, of knowing that so much has to be done differently, but being confronted by a world that is nowhere near that vision of sustainability. And I think that for me, looking at the work that you've done, one of the greatest acts of leadership that I'm benefiting from is your capacity to deal with your own mental ecology, in that you're able to sustain that vision and to move towards it no matter what. And I wanted to just hear any thoughts that you had to offer about that challenge.
I know. Once you get it, you can't unget it. I'm on the hook for life.
I'm glad.
Hi, my name is Stella Tarney. I work with co-housing communities and members of the building industry to create environmentally sustainable housing. But my question is more broad than that. Given the current administration, how do you suggest those of us interested in the same issues you are, we work with the current administration on creating more sustainable solutions in society and business? And given the administration's affinity to business, what leverage points might you suggest we use?
Boy, there are people a lot smarter than I am sweating with that one. And I don't have a clue. All I know to do is keep on keeping on. I do think in a way that the business community is moving beyond the political process. Kyoto, for example, I think the carbon intensity of our economy will fall. And incidentally, the carbon intensity of the Chinese economy, John, you could help me on this, is way down compared with ours. Been falling and falling more rapidly, and I think ours is close to peaking. But anyway.
We're supposed to be very cool here at Harvard and intellectual, but I want to conclude by, I'm sure, joining you in thanking Ray for keeping on, and for coming here to Harvard. And I don't know if this is inspirational, but I guess Wayne Gretzky says that other people skate to where the puck is. He skates to where the puck ought to be and where it's going. And Ray does that. He's a personal and professional hero to me, and I'm very grateful that he joined us this evening.